Hello, and welcome to today's lesson of virtual math class. Today we're going to be talking about the x-intercept and the y-intercept. So the objective for today is the students will be able to identify the x-intercept and the y-intercept from a graph. Now, the question of the hour is, what are the x and the y-intercepts? So the x-intercept is the point where a line crosses the x-axis. So we have the x-intercept crossing the x-axis. At this point, the y-coordinate is 0. And the y, not the coordinate, the y-intercept, is the point where a line crosses the y-axis. So we have the y-intercept crossing the y-axis. And at this point, the x-coordinate is 0. So it's the exact same thing except opposite. So whenever you think of x-intercept, think of the x-axis. And the y-intercept, think about the y-axis. Okay, so this just breaks it down a little further. So the y-intercept is the point it crosses the y-axis. So this is the y-axis, this is the x-axis. Y-intercept would be 6 in this case because that's the point that it crosses the y-axis. The x-intercept in this case would be -4 because that's the point that the line crosses the x-axis. It's pretty simple and straightforward. So again, on this one, the x-intercept is labeled. So our x-intercept would be 1, 2, 3. So our x-intercept is 3, and in this case, our y-intercept, 1, 2, 3, would be right here, and it would also be 3. So in this case, but our x and our y-intercept are both 3. So now if we look at this example, our y-intercept would be right here at 4 because that's the point that it crosses the y-axis. And so then our x-intercept would be the point that it crosses the x-axis, which would be where? At -2. So our y-intercept is 4 and our x-intercept is -2. So on this one, we start with our y-intercept. Our y-intercept is when it crosses the y-axis. So remember that this is my y-axis, and the point that it crosses would be right here, right? So what point is that? That's -1. So my y-intercept is -1. My x-intercept would be where? What would my x-intercept be? The point that it crosses the x-axis would be right here. So my x-intercept would be 5 because that's the number that would be between 4 and 6. So my y-intercept is -1 and my x-intercept is 5. So on this one, our y-intercept is the point it crosses the y-axis, and it's harder to tell, but it would be right here. So that would be +1. So my y-intercept is 1. And where does this line cross my x-axis? So it crosses right here, but I can't really tell what point that is. So for this case, I'm just going to identify our y-intercept as being 1 and not identify the x-intercept. But just know that your x-intercept is the point where your line crosses the x-axis. And our last example, what is our y-intercept? Where does this line cross the y-axis at? It crosses down here at -40. So my y-intercept is -40. My x-intercept then is where it crosses the x-axis. So it crosses right here. What point is this? It would be the point 10 because what is halfway between 0 and 20? 10. So I'm going up by 10 each time if you wanted to fill in the gaps. So my x-intercept is 10. My y-intercept is -40. My x-intercept is 10. That concludes today's lesson. It's pretty simple, straightforward. Hopefully no one will have any problems with it. But just remember that your y-intercept is the point that your line crosses the y-axis, and your x-intercept is the point that your line crosses the x-axis.